Well, good afternoon. I'm Sarah Wyant, the founder and president of Agri-Pulse Communications, and I'm so pleased to have so many of you join us this afternoon for our webinar, Economic Stakes, How Thoroughbred Racing Fuels Rural Economies. As someone who grew up riding horses, albeit not race horses, I've long admired and appreciated all the work it takes to feed and care for your animals. When you look more broadly about the impact on the rural economy, you can see why thoroughbred horse racing, one of the biggest entertainment and sporting industries in the United States, is also a very large contributor to rural economic development. And that's all because of the impact on jobs and agriculture, veterinarians, farmland owners, tourism, and more. So we're really pleased to have this webinar today, sponsored by the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority and the Breeders' Cup. We're going to hear from all of our distinguished speakers with facilitated questions and answers. I'm going to make brief speaker introductions and encourage you to dig into their full biographies on our website. We also want to hear from you, the audience, so please enter your questions in the Q&A portion at the bottom of your screen, not the chat box. If you're experiencing any technical issues, please use the Q&A function also, and our team will assist you. In addition, we're going to be recording today's discussion, and the webinar will be available later this week on agra-pulse.com. So to start off, we're very pleased to introduce our first speaker, Congressman Andy Barr, who has represented Kentucky's 6th congressional district since 2013. I know he's a very busy man these days with everything happening on Capitol Hill, but he's represents a district that is home to 400 of the world's greatest horse breeding operations. So we're really glad he can be here today. He's also a senior member of the House Financial Services Committee, where he serves as chairman of the influential Financial Institutions and Monetary Policy Subcommittee. Please welcome Congressman Barr.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. And I appreciate the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority and Lisa Lazarus for the invitation, along with the Breeders' Cup, to participate in today's webinar. Thank you to Agri-Pulse and for the opportunity to share a little bit about the signature industry of Kentucky's 6th congressional district. The 6th district is central Kentucky, and as was indicated, home to 400 of the world's leading thoroughbred breeding operations. We also have other breeds well represented within the horse industry. In central Kentucky, we have a standardbred racetrack called the Red Mile. We have the Kentucky Horse Park, which is home to the 3-day event, and we've been home to the FEI World Equestrian Games there in central Kentucky. So it is an equine-focused district, and the economy is very dependent on our equine industry. The national economic impact of the thoroughbred industry is about $36 billion and a $6.5 billion economic impact in the Commonwealth of Kentucky alone. So this is a beautiful sport, but it's also an industry that's responsible for a whole lot of economic activity and a lot of jobs. Days like the Kentucky Derby and the Kentucky Oaks in and of themselves produce about over $200 million just alone in those 2 days, that weekend. The Breeders' Cup, of course, has been hosted by Churchill Downs in Louisville and also the Keeneland Racecourse in Lexington in my district. And the Breeders' Cup itself brings in about $82 million for that event. And you'll hear more about the Breeders' Cup from Drew Fleming, the very capable and talented CEO of that organization, here in a minute, if you haven't already heard from him. But I want to stress one other thing about my district that's a bit different than the congressional district in Louisville, home to Churchill Downs and the Kentucky Derby, because the Keeneland Racecourse has kind of two major lines of business. One is the racing. April and October are the racing seasons for Keeneland, and they host the Breeders' Cup, and they've done some great things in the Grade 1 Bluegrass Stakes and another Derby prep race, the Lexington Stakes. is at Keeneland. But the auction, especially the September yearling sales, is a globally renowned thoroughbred yearling sale that attracts investors and buyers from around the world, ranging from France and Ireland and the United Kingdom to Japan, Australia, obviously the Middle East, where the Saudis, the Qataris, and the Emiratis have been very, very active for a long time, in South America, Brazil, Argentina. So it's truly a global sale, and Keeneland's racing operations and annual thoroughbred auctions, plus the investment in new construction, generates about $1.6 billion for Fayette County, Central Kentucky alone. So that just is, I give you those numbers and those statistics to underscore how economically significant this industry actually is. This year's 151st running of the Kentucky Derby was a good one. It was a good one for me personally because my group won the pick six. There was a little too much chalk, so the ROI wasn't as good as you would expect for the pick six. For those of you who are not familiar with horse racing wagering, that means you're picking the winners in all 6 consecutive races leading up to and including the Kentucky Derby. So our ticket included Sovereignty, the Kentucky Derby winner. I also had a personal big win because I had the trifecta in the Derby. So it was about as good of a day as I could have had at the Derby, despite it being rainy. Nobody has a bad day, even when it's soggy or when it's a muddy track. So I'll just kind of end by saying we're so grateful to HISA for giving us this platform to represent the horse capital of the world. My colleague and friend from Ocala, Florida, Kat Kammack, Congresswoman Kat Kammack, she claims Ocala and the Gainesville, Florida area as the horse capital of the world. She's wrong. The horse capital of the world is still solidly in Lexington, Kentucky and surrounding areas. But Kat represents a fantastic equine industry there in Ocala as well. Just know that we recognize the responsibility of representing the horse capital of the world and these 400 amazing world-class thoroughbred breeding operations, because there's a lot of jobs at stake. There's a lot of economic activity at stake. And that's exactly why I partnered with my colleague, Congressman Paul Tonko, a number of years ago to over and over again try to reform the thoroughbred industry. And we did it. We did it with the passage in 2020 of the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act, the most transformational reform of the thoroughbred industry in a number of decades, probably since the passage in the 1970s of the Interstate Horse Racing Act, which created the architecture for interstate simulcast wagering. And this legislation created a national uniform program for medication control and also for racetrack safety. And I think will provide the framework going forward for a safer sport, a sport with fewer on-track fatalities, a sport that's safer for the riders and the jockeys, and a sport that will attract a new generation of fans and investors, which is so important to make sure that there is integrity and safety in this sport so that there can be continued lasting prosperity in the sport. We'll continue to monitor the implementation of the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act to provide that those successful statistics that we're starting to see as a result of that law, of a significant drop in on-track fatalities, which of course are a threat to the sport. And we want it to be a safe sport. We want it to be a sport where doping is, there's a zero tolerance for doping, and so that international spectators and participants will have confidence in the sport and in the industry, and that will fuel the long-term, again, economic prosperity and viability of the industry. So with that, again, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share a passion of mine, which is the thoroughbred industry. I get this honestly. My grandfather was in the industry. He was the vice president of the Thoroughbred Racing Association. He was credited J.B. Falconer was his name, my mother's father, with starting the Eclipse Awards, which is the annual awards for the top horses and participants in the industry. And so it's personal to me that this beautiful sport and part of the culture and heritage of our country continues well into the future. So with that, thank you so much to everyone for giving me this platform. And looking forward to a great remainder of the Triple Crown racing season.
Thank you, Congressman Barr. It's obviously you do have a great passion for the industry, and we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for a few minutes today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So next up, I'd like to invite Joby Young to join us. He's the Executive Vice President for the American Farm Bureau Federation. Young leads the AFBF staff, managing across all departments to achieve the goal of President Zippy Duvall and the board of directors fulfilling AFBF's mission. He grew up in and around horse racing in rural areas and has more than a decade of experience in food and rural policy. We asked him to share some of his personal insights and experiences and reflect on the conservation and the value created by farms under easement that are involved in this industry. So Joby, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thanks for the invitation to participate today. And I appreciated Congressman Barr's comments and look forward to my other panelists, my co-panelists here, and their comments about the economic contribution of horse racing to rural areas and the country in general. I'll hope to speak in just a minute about the how that fits into the overall rural economy, which my current role at American Farm Bureau we care a lot about. But first, I'd like to put on my hat just to share how the perspective of a kid that grew up on a horse farm in rural America, and the benefit, aside from the economic value and other things, just the quality of life and what that means out here in rural America. I grew up in North Georgia, and Congressman mentioned that in his district there's 400 leading horse breeding horse farms there. I think we might have been the only one in our county. It's Georgia is not a state that has a parimutuel wagering or any horse tracks. But my dad actually was a jockey for his first part of his career, and he and my mother trained horses as well, owned them throughout the early part of their career. And then once he had retired from his career as a rider, both he on one side, my mother and my stepfather on the other side, we raised horses my entire childhood. And we had a small operation where we bred, trained, and raced our own horses, primarily in quarter horses actually, but over the years also involved in thoroughbreds. My dad was a quarter horse rider, but actually ended his career managing a thoroughbred farm before he retired. And so I've been involved in that all throughout. So we would keep a handful of mares, and we'd have homebreds every year. And for most of them, we take them through their racing career. And so that was a great experience for me. I would, if every kid got to grow up in the way that I grew up, being on a small horse farm and living in a rural setting, and learning the lessons that I did, and living that quality of life, that'd be excellent. So, just that piece I think has an enormous value, just as a personal anecdote, personal testimony of why this is important. Of course, the ability to live and have a small farm and have economic value to it that keeps you in a rural area, keeps the area you live in rural in character, but then also be able to grow up in a family and learn all the things you do through that lifestyle, whether it's having to do chores every day. And we didn't have we had few cold days in North Georgia, but in the winter, getting out, busting up ice and water troughs, and having to clean stalls and keep up with living things and learning all those things that I was able to learn, aside from having scattered around the living room, my mom's hand-drawn notes in stallion registries and other things, always doing research on breeding and those sorts of things, and learning, being exposed to that aspect of it. Everybody has their own story. I work now with mostly farm kids and folks that are involved in production agriculture, but that was my vehicle to grow up in a rural area and experience that quality of life. And so I just think there's tremendous value to that, and it's something worth working together to preserve. The other piece I was just going to mention, not being involved in my day-to-day in horse racing in my career now, for the most part, but as Sarah mentioned, my role is as executive vice president of the American Farm Bureau Federation, and I've been able to use that to continue working on rural matters, but primarily we focus on production agriculture. Most of our members across the country are the largest general purpose farm organization in the country, representing farmers and ranchers across the country. And we spend most of our time working on issues like farm bill or agricultural labor and things of that nature. But we do have a lot of members. We have policy on equine. Of course, we were Georgia Farm Bureau members, and so we're part of the greater agriculture and rural community. And so our policy supports equine activities as part of that rural fabric and that over agricultural network. And it's important because I think a lot of people on the call today on the session might work closely in rural and agriculture issues. Others maybe not as much. But we know the challenges that rural America has economically sometimes, and then certainly when we deal with farmland and preservation of farmland and those sorts of things, that we need a diverse and dynamic rural economy. And I think that something like thoroughbred racing or horse racing, equine activities generally are an important part of that. It keeps together the ability to have things like a large animal veterinary area, have things like the feed store and the other infrastructure that everybody benefits from, and having that diversified at local economy. And whether that's a lot of folks running cattle or some folks that might be in an area that's primarily more equine related, or somewhere in between. That's going to be important to have these robust industries that bring back economic activity to these rural areas and help them thrive and continue to succeed. And so that's an important thing. And certainly that's what is a big mission that we focus our time on is when I get up every morning, and the rest of our team and our network across the country, we're looking out for how we build those thriving rural communities. And I think something like having a succeeding thoroughbred racing industry and generally the greater equine community is a big part of that. So I appreciate the invitation to join today, and I look forward to the comments of my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Joby. Appreciate your insights there. And I'm glad you'll be able to stay with us for some questions here a little bit later. Next, I'd like to introduce Lisa Lazarus. She's a Chief Executive Officer for the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority. She oversees the authority's full operations, including the implementation of racetrack safety program and the anti-doping and medication control program. We asked her to talk to us today about what her organization does, how it supports the sustainability of the thoroughbred racing industry, and share some of the economic impacts. So Lisa, off to you.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm really delighted to be here today because while we feel very much a part of the rural community and the agricultural community, we don't have that many opportunities at HISA to interact. So this has really been an exciting event for me, and I really enjoyed hearing Joby and Representative Barr's comments. I'm going to start with explaining a little bit about HISA, where it came from, its purpose, and then we'll segue to the economic benefits. So if I can get the first slide, please. So for those of you that don't know, HISA is actually an independent organization that's responsible for enforcing national uniform and integrity rules for all thoroughbred racing. We're exclusive to thoroughbreds, and we regulate 47 tracks in 19 different states. We were actually modeled after FINRA, for those of you who are familiar with FINRA. We are a private entity, but we're created by federal law, and we report to the Federal Trade Commission as our agency of record. So anytime we want to promulgate a rule or make a change, we have to do that with the approval of the FTC. Another thing that's important to know is that HISA does not receive any federal funding or taxpayer money. We are entirely industry funded. There is a formula that the statute requires us to use to determine which states, which racetracks, which horsemen pay what percentage of the overall budget for HISA annually. But all of that is industry funded. The next slide, please. So when Congress gave HISA or created this mandate within HISA, it was really over two very specific categories of regulation. And it came from a period of time where there were some real safety concerns in horse racing, particularly thoroughbreds, as well as integrity concerns around doping. And so Congress essentially said, listen, this whole idea of states regulating themselves state by state with no continuity, without really a whole lot of cooperation, being in silos, it's really not working. And horse racing is really important for America's economy, America's culture. So we think that horse racing should be like every other sport and have one national entity. But they were specific in what they granted to HISA in terms of our oversight authority. And that really falls into two buckets. One is racetrack safety. So everything from accreditation of racetracks to jockey and rider and exercise rider injuries. It's making sure that anybody who's doing anything on the racetrack is being kept safe and is following rules and standards that are professional and appropriate and commensurate with the mission, which is to keep everybody safe. And the second component is the anti-doping and medication control program. And that is our equine anti-doping program. We test almost 100,000 horses a year through all sorts of different strategies. May it be post-race, may it be out of competition. There are a number of different strategies and programs that we have in place to ensure that essentially horse racing is fair, that it's a level playing field, and that also horses aren't being harmed by substances that should not be in their system. One thing that's important to potentially explain is that HISA runs the Racetrack Safety Program directly, but under the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act, Congress required us to appoint an independent anti-doping agency to manage it day to day. So while HISA creates the rules and the regulations and we pick the anti-doping entity, which is called the Horse Racing Integrity and Welfare Unit, they run the day-to-day operations of HISA. Essentially, they decide the testing plan, they prosecute the cases, they interact with the laboratories, and HISA sort of sits above that. Next slide, please. So I mentioned this a little bit, but I'll just sort of describe again some of the impetus for HISA's creation and why it's so important and why it's been so impactful. It's hard to imagine in the world that we live in now that is, a tremendous sport in the US is obviously incredibly popular, incredibly front of mind, and we are very used to seeing leagues. We're used to seeing governing bodies. It rarely would occur to us, I think, that you might have a situation where in the NFL, for example, you play the game one way when you're in Philadelphia playing the Eagles, and you play it a different way when you're in New York playing the Giants. It just makes no sense. And that's what horse racing was like for many, many years. So when HISA came in, what we did was we created uniform rules across the board to make sure that everybody was essentially following the same rules, the same directions. It made sense because in the current environment, trainers and horses, they frequently go from state to state. they may go to 3 states in 1 week, depending on if it's a high-level trainer who has horses that he or she wants to put in different races, different parts of the country. So to think, oh my God, now today I'm in Kentucky, what's the rule? Tomorrow I'm in New York, the next time I'm in Maryland, it really didn't make sense, and it wasn't good for the horses. And it actually really wasn't good for the trainers and the participants as well. So this was when Congress essentially got together, became concerned about the public's trust and support for horse racing, and in particular, the tremendous economic impact that it has in the US and in rural America, and making sure that they could come up with some sort of model to safeguard it going forward. Some way to ensure that horse racing would have a chance to be protected and to ultimately succeed for generations to come. It's the oldest sport in America, and we want it to be the longest surviving sport in America. Next slide, please. So it was December of 2020 when the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act was signed into law by President Trump. It was really an incredibly bipartisan bill. It was championed by Senator McConnell and Senator Schumer, who worked together. Senator McConnell obviously being from Kentucky, and where there's a whole lot of horse racing with impact on their economy and their lifestyle. And Schumer, who also between the Belmont and Saratoga is very important. New York is a very important player in horse racing as well. It had 261 co-sponsors, so really heavily supported. And then essentially, once it was passed, the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act created the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority, which is the organization that I run, to oversee the day-to-day operations of essentially the entity, and to make sure that the rules are enforced, that we educate participants about what the rules mean, how they follow them, and we essentially create programs, procedures, and rules to safeguard the industry and also to help it flourish, because we've come to realize, and I think it's probably self-evident, that in today's world, if you have a sport that isn't perceived as safe, it isn't perceived as fair, it's perceived as having real risks around horse safety and around integrity, it's not going to be an industry or a sport that flourishes. And so HISA's job really is to give the industry that foundation that it can then build on, and so that we only see the very best things of horse racing in the media. Next slide, please. So this is really the story of HISA. This graph captures the most important goal that we work towards at HISA, and that is reducing equine fatalities. Everything that we do points towards is an ingredient in the recipe that we're making to lower the risk of equine fatalities. We know the #1 risk of a jockey getting hurt is a horse getting hurt while the jockey's on it. Somewhat obvious. So if we can bring down horse fatalities, equine injuries, it also has obviously a very significant knock-on effect on jockey health and safety. But also it shows that we want to have a sport that creates an ecosystem of care for horses, that makes sure that we are doing everything we can to put the horse at the center of all decisions, that it is about the welfare of the horse. And that's where we sort of start the conversation and we start the building. What this chart shows is back in 2009, way before HISA was created, the Jockey Club started something called the Equine Injury Database. And that was a database where racetracks voluntarily provided data on their racing fatalities for the year. And a racing fatality is any horse fatality that occurs within 72 hours of a race. And so you can see that back when they launched the Equine Injury Database, we measure in horse racing equine fatalities by 1,000 starts. So it was 2 equine fatalities per 1,000 starts. And you can see that it's definitely improving. It has a little bit of a spike in 2014. But then when HISA comes on board in 2022, you see a consistent reduction. You see us going in the first year, not a whole lot down from 1.25 to 1.23, But last year, which was the first year that we had HISA fully operational, because we launched our racetrack safety program in July of 2022, but the anti-doping program not until May of 23. So which was half of 23. So 2024 was the first year that we had everything going, kind of all trains running. And it was the first time that we were able to achieve a number that was below 1. And that is in line with our international peers. And one of the things that Representative Barr mentioned that I think is really important is with that improvement, we've seen a genuine impact on international buyers coming to the US and buying horses and feeling confident in the horses that they're buying. There used to be, wrongly, fairly or not, a perception that American horses, might be drugged or they might not have been treated properly, et cetera. And that has really shifted. And I hear that all the time from people, and that has definitely been one of the positives that's come from the implementation of HISA, is just bringing confidence back to the global community that the US is at par when it comes to safety and integrity with jurisdictions like Hong Kong, Japan, the UK, and now our numbers are bearing that out also. Next slide, please. So now we're talking about the economic impact of horse racing. So we are incredibly connected to the rural economy because essentially our racetracks operate like subsets of the rural economy. For those of you that don't know, many people actually live at the racetrack, the ones that care for the horses day in and day out. And they are almost like smaller cities of people working together to support the horses, working together to care for the horses. And we have a vast network of businesses and livelihoods, from breeders and veterinarians to feed suppliers, transportation companies, equipment manufacturers, tourism, hospitality sectors. I mean, there are so many things that horse racing touches. So when I think about horse racing, people often talk to me about it as a sport, and it is a sport, but it is also very much an industry. It really sits in a unique position between the sporting entertainment world and ultimately an industry where horses are cared for, trained, and ultimately set out to the track to be successful and to show their skills. So that means that for us at HISA, horse racing is more about preserving the sport. It's not just about preserving, it's also about protecting and enhancing the way of life for many communities in rural America. Our people, feel very connected to rural America. There are not like so many families who come from a history where their great-grandparents and grandparents and parents were in the horse industry and ran horse farms or bred horses. And that's a continuity of life and of lifestyle that has not just an economic impact, but also a cultural impact. As Representative Barr mentioned, U.S. horse racing has an annual direct economic impact of $36 billion and supports 491,000 jobs in the U.S. As a subset of that, U.S. thoroughbred racing has an annual direct economic impact of $18 billion and supports 169,000 jobs. Next slide, please. We took a couple of examples of states, both Pennsylvania and Florida had some really good data on their industries in their states specifically. So we chose to highlight those and share that data. So in Pennsylvania, horse racing is a significant contributor to the state's larger agricultural economy, with total direct expenditures of over $721 million. More specifically, horse owners and breeders serve as the major customers for grain, for hay, and straw farmers. Many of these farmers rely on horse owners to stay in business and maintain agriculturally productive open space. Obviously, open space and green space is very much also a part of the horse racing ethos and is something else that it contributes to American life. The equine industry is also responsible for protecting 18% of the total acres set aside in Pennsylvania's agricultural preservation program. Next slide, please. This is one of my favorite slides because I've always tried to explain to people who don't know a whole lot about horse racing, like how many people just one horse employs. I mean, it goes from, the trainer to the owner to the jockey to the exercise rider to the farrier. You have racetrack employees, racing officials, grooms. I already said breeders. You've got the auction house, the bloodstock agents. You've got lots of attorneys, hot walkers, equine transportation companies. It is really, there is just a massive amount of economic activity and economic essentially interactions with horse racing and the rural economy. I mean, horse racing very much impacts so many different sectors and has that impact that we believe is incredibly important to make sure is sustained, is supported, and is ultimately, survives and continues to have an impact on America. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier that I was also going to share some statistics about Florida. Some of you may know, but some of you may not. Florida is really the heartland of where younger horses are born and bred alongside Kentucky, but Ocala is certainly one of the mega centers, and the Florida thoroughbred industry contributes $3.24 billion to the Florida economy. And the American Horse Council commissioned a study that reaffirmed the status of the Florida equine industry, and specifically thoroughbred horse racing as a major sports and agricultural industry within the state. The equine industry as a whole in Florida contributes $12.8 billion to the Florida economy, with Florida thoroughbreds contributing more than 1/4 of that total. The equine industry creates more than 112,000 jobs in Florida, with 30% or 33,500 of those jobs attributed to the thoroughbred industry. And again, going back to kind of green spaces, Florida land dedicated to equine related activities is 561,000 acres. Next slide, please. So sort of to wrap it all up, for over 150 years, U.S. horse racing has been an economic driver in rural America and has helped to preserve, promote, and enhance rural communities. Our commitment to safety and integrity at HISA, in partnership with rural communities, will continue to create economically strong rural communities for centuries to come. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for all that great information. And I know that you'll be able to join us for some questions later on. I'm happy to have our next speaker as Drew Fleming, who's the President and Chief Executive Officer of Breeders' Cup Limited. Under his leadership, the company has achieved unprecedented growth in revenue, global participation, and content distribution, domestic and international wagering, and strategic partnerships. We asked him to share some data about the Breeders' Cup and the impact of horse racing in California. So Drew, we'll hand it over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me here today. I'm Drew Fleming. I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of Breeders' Cup, and really excited to tell the incredible journey and story of the Breeders' Cup. During my time with the company, and before that as a corporate lawyer representing equine clients from around the world, I've been able to see firsthand the agricultural production, the labor, and the community engagement that goes into producing America's greatest racing champions. Notable winners such as Torpedo Anna, who I'll talk about in a little bit, often become national stars thanks to their rural roots. Breeders' Cup's mission is to conduct the year-end Breeders' Cup World Championships at the highest levels of quality, safety, and integrity, and to promote the growth of thoroughbred breeding, racing, and sales through proactive leadership, innovation, and service. Often tell people that aren't as familiar with the Breeders' Cup as racing fans, Breeders' Cup is the perfect marriage between track and field for the Olympics and the Super Bowl. It's our year-end championships where we have 14 races that are worth $34 million of purses and awards. And why do we have 14 races? Well, just like the Olympics and track and field, we have different divisions. We have male and female divisions, young and old horse divisions, We have dirt and turf divisions and different links of those races. So those combined make up our 14 championship races where the world's best horses are crowned champions in their fields. Last year's Breeders' Cup, we had record international participation. We had 61 horses travel from around the world representing 5 continents to compete in the Breeders' Cup. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about the direct economic impact the World Championships has on the U.S. economy. As many of you know, the Breeders' Cup rotates racetracks each year. Last year, we were in Del Mar, California, and San Diego. The year before that, we were at Santa Anita in LA. We've been to New York. We've been to Kentucky. We've been to Florida. We've been to many venues across the U.S., highlighting America's best venues and America's best racing. And any time we're in that geographic area, we want to leave a fantastic impact on the local community and appreciate our community partners for all their support and the hard work that goes on into hosting a World Championships. So, for example, let's look at the 2022 Breeders' Cup, which generated a total estimated economic impact of nearly $82 million in Lexington, Kentucky, and the surrounding areas, as fans and horsemen from around the world gathered to witness and compete in the World Championships in Kentucky, our bluegrass state. Some specifics about that event: $30.5 million was wagered in on-track spending, including wagerings, concessions, parking, and merchandise. $33.6 million in spending on hotels, retailers, food and beverage, transportation, and off-track entertainment. $10 million in track infrastructure investments for Keeneland Racecourse, where we constructed triple-decker chalets, with approximately $7.5 million in labor and material costs generated by the projects, which boosted the Lexington economy by an estimated $17.5 million overall. $900,000 was secured in state and local tax revenues, and $5.3 million was secured in federal tax revenues. Millions of those dollars had direct impact on the rural communities all throughout Kentucky. I'd also like to spend a minute to talk about the national economic impacts of tourism and wagering generated by racing. Horse racing takes place in more than 30 states from coast to coast, so it truly is a national industry with millions of racing fans traveling to tracks and farms in the surrounding areas to experience thoroughbred breeding farms, sales, and training facilities. Last year, more than 30,000 races were held at numerous tracks across the country, paying out purses of approximately $1.25 billion. In 2024, the total wagering handle in the U.S., which is the total amount of money wagered on the equine sporting events across all platforms, reached over $11.2 billion. Also in 2024, approximately 14,000 horses were sold at public auction, accounting for $1.2 billion in gross sales. And that doesn't factor in revenue from many horses that changed hands privately. Just as Lisa did, I'll touch on a specific state, and would like to talk about California in particular. California is one of the largest thoroughbred horse racing hubs in the United States, and it serves as the host site for the Breeders' Cup World Championships for 12 of the last 19 years. We'll take a minute and look at the economic impact of horse racing specifically in California. The estimated impact of the Breeders' Cup World Championships hosted at Del Mar last year was over $100 million. According to the American Horse Council's 2024 Economic Impact Study, the California horse racing industry contributes approximately $2.5 billion annually to the economy. Last year, California horse racing paid out approximately $136 million in purses, and $1.6 billion was wagered on California content, and close to $1 billion was wagered by California residents on content outside of California. Horse racing generates approximately 37,000 jobs in California. The California horse racing industry also plays a significant role in the preservation of trails, public lands, and their associated conservation work and agricultural land. Interestingly, 48% of California horse owners report owning or leasing a farm, barn, or stable, and California land dedicated to equine and equine-related activities is approximately 410,000 acres. And I'd like to close with a brief story about a horse named Torpedo Anna. You may have heard of her. She won our marquee race for fillies and mares last year and proved that champions can and often do come from humble beginnings. RW and Judy Hicks own Brookstown Farm, a smaller thoroughbred breeding operation near the small town of Versailles, Kentucky. Torpedo Anna's dam was born premature and undersized. It cost only $10,000 to breed the Torpedo Anna's sire, and while that fee might be expensive in terms of breeding for certain types of livestock, it's modest for thoroughbreds. Judy Hicks sold the filly for just $40,000 at auction, a bargain for a thoroughbred yearling, and she sold it to trainer Kenny McPeak. But when she sold the horse, she asked to stay invested in the horse as a partner. Something told her this girl was special. To date, Torpedo Anna has won 10 races, including the Kentucky Oaks and the Longines Breeders' Cup Distaff, earning close to $5 million as a racehorse. Last year, the Breeders' Cup Distaff catapulted her to Horse of the Year and championed 3-year-old filly at the Eclipse Awards, which Congressman Andy Barr talked about a minute ago, which is horse racing's highest honor. These are the possibilities of thoroughbred racing, and that starts in farms all across rural America. Thank you again for the opportunity to share information about our great sport and its connections to rural America. We look forward to continuing this dialogue with the participants on this webinar, and again, it was a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew, for those insights. There's one thing we can definitely tell from all this discussion is that there has been a great deal of money that's involved in the sport, and to hear a success story like Torpedo Annie really warms the heart to think that a small town person could reap those kinds of benefits. So I'd like to invite Lisa and Joby to come back. We've got a lot of questions and not that much time, so we're going to try to spin through these as much as we can. I'm going to start with the first one, just a little bit more if we can dig into a couple of topics that came up. Lisa, starting with you, the rationale for creating HISA was that the industry needed these uniform standards to improve safety and integrity of the sport. What do you see as the key economic relationship of the sport of horse racing and the role of HISA? And then if we could build on that with one of the questions from the audience is, where does someone go when they want to find these numbers and these statistics to support the industry and build on what you've presented?
So I'll start by saying, like, as a regulator, we're very aware and interested in the economic impact of horse racing. Ultimately, it's sort of an exercise in futility if we make horse racing safer and fairer, but no one participates, or we don't see participation grow. It's been mentioned already that we have an annual impact of 36 billion. That's very close to the rice industry, which is 34 billion. And so the way that we look at it is we want to create this environment that attracts participants that people feel good about being associated with. So then therefore it will flourish. It's really about kind of creating a place where the growth of horse racing and the interactions are really valued. So for example, I think this will probably be better exemplified with a couple of stories. There's a number of people who have come to us recently, like Bobby Flay, for example, the chef. He had left horse racing for a period of time because he felt that he had concerns about its integrity and concerns about its safety. He recently reached out to me to tell me that he had come back to horse racing. He had reinvested because he felt really good about the regulatory framework that was in place, and he felt that things had really changed significantly. He just won a big race yesterday at the Preakness. We're seeing influencers for the younger generation like Griffin Johnson being willing to be a part of horse racing and to just show that incredibly strong connection to the horse. And that wouldn't happen. We know that, today's generation is incredibly sensitive, especially to horse welfare and animal welfare. And without that foundation, we don't believe we'd be able to attract people like that. There's a musicians group that just launched a horse racing partnership where they're going to start buying horses. And I similarly said they were waiting to see whether or not HISA would be a strong regulatory framework. So the role that we see ourselves in is we're not the story. We're not the main story. The main story is the horses, the riders, just all of the celebration around it. What we are is we are the foundation that allows the main story to thrive. And with that thriving comes economic growth.
Thank you.
Oh,
And
and
Joby,
numbers.
oh,
Yeah,
go
sorry.
ahead.
That's that one question. So the question about the numbers is a really good one. We're constantly looking for as much information as we can get. The American Horse Council has done a number of studies where they track this information, which is where we got some of our information. Same with some of the state racing commissions. But we are intending to, as an industry, commission more of this research so that we can, start looking at it from different perspectives.
Yeah, we had one questioner who started a campaign or collected information called Virginia's Economy Wins with Horses. So it was good to hear about that as well. I'll circle back to that question. But Joby, I want to turn to you just in terms of some of the other impacts that maybe we haven't discussed about yet. One of our questioners want to know what's not only the agribusiness impact, and I know, Lisa, you had a John Deere tractor on one of your slides. That seems a pretty obvious one to me because you've got to have equipment that you're doing these things, but also on just farmland preservation where, right now we're not in a great spot with a lot of commodity prices, but if we've got to keep grazing and lands open and just look at the way that we need to keep feeding all these animals. Joby, can you talk about that from your perspective, what you've seen growing up with the horse industry?
Yeah, sure. So in any community, whether it's rural, urban, suburban, obviously they're going to be stronger the more robust economy they have from a a diverse perspective. And so if you put that if you look at just a rural community, I lived in a county out here in Northern Virginia for a time, and there was production agriculture there. There was row crop. There was folks raising cattle and different livestock, and there was a lot of there was agritourism there and wineries and so forth, and then there was a lot of horse farms there. Some for from a thoroughbred standpoint, other pursuits, other breeds, and what that created was an economy where there could be a feed store, there could be that tractor dealership, there could be the large animal vet there, and the other things that support that. There could be the supply chain. If you talk about the folks that have a farm there and they're raising thoroughbreds there or other parts of the equine industry, they need a neighbor, somebody in the county, usually somebody in maybe the next state for whatever nutrition program they have for hay and other things. And so there's a supply chain associated with that's pretty intuitive, and every little bit counts. That picture, I was going to mention the picture of the tractor there, and they were in the hayfield. That additional customer or handful of customers are going to support that business in that rural community, and that's important. You mentioned the farmland preservation. It is a challenge out in rural America. We look at development, we look at other things that go on that are competing for farmland and open space use and pasture land and so forth. And this gives it one more opportunity to stay rural in character, stay in production, stay with livestock on the ground, and I think that's a good thing. And the last thing I'd mention is that the diversity for a farm family out there. There'll be folks that I know they're raising cattle. They're involved in this industry or others. And that gives them ability to pencil and have their business, live the lifestyle they love, and keep raising their kids and their families and be a part of those communities out there in the rural areas. So I think all these things make sense, and they're important, and it's one important part of a grander sort of complex set of solutions we need to help rural America thrive.
And we're just about out of time here. So with a minute or so left, if you could answer this question, Lisa, about just what you see as the future of horse racing in the U.S. We also had questions coming from, this one's from Samantha. We had one from Mike Way, looking at, what happens if California continues to lose horse racing potential. What do you see out there on the horizon? as you could end.
So I have to say I'm incredibly optimistic about the future, not just because, you know, our CR fatality numbers coming down and our rules and procedures working, but there are a number of objective metrics you can look at. For example, if you look at Kentucky, both Keeneland and Churchill in the past year or so have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in their facilities, in rebuilding and expanding. You look at Maryland. Maryland, yesterday we had not yesterday, 2 days ago, we had the last Preakness at Pimlico, which is now going to be demolished and completely rebuilt. And the Maryland state government has dedicated significant funds. They see it as an important economic contributor to the state, and they're providing public money to rebuild the racetrack. Same with New York, public money, the state has invested in a complete rebuild of Belmont Park. Oaklawn in Arkansas recently finished an incredibly modern hotel and spa. So when you go to see the races, you can have other activities. You can wake up in the morning and look onto the track and see the horses exercising. So you see modernization, you see growth, and that's really exciting. You know, I think that's going to continue as long as we can continue to demonstrate that we are deserving of a sport that uses thoroughbreds and that employs thoroughbreds, and that we're following sort of the moral ethics and the right procedures to put the horse at the center of everything.
Thank you. I'm sorry we've run out of time to ask all the rest of the questions, but we'll capture those in the Q&A section, and hopefully we can get back to folks at least who left their name. And I'd just like to thank you, Lisa and Joby, again for your comments and your participation, your sponsorship here, Lisa. And just as we close, I want to share with all of our participants, if you're not familiar with us, Agri-Pulse covers a wide range of farm, rural, food issues. And so go ahead and scan this QR code for a free trial, learn a little bit more about the content that we deliver on a daily basis to all of our subscribers and listeners. And we'd really like to thank you again for joining us today about how to learn more about how thoroughbred racing fuels rural economies. Please stay in touch, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.